to have any influence on slowing down or at least having a check and balance on North Korea's nuclear program?
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Vice President, President Trump inherited the North Korea problem from past presidents, so we're in decades. What would a President Biden do that President Obama didn't do in 8 years?
First of all, I'd go back to making sure we had the alliances we had before he became president. He has absolutely ostracized us from South Korea. He has given North Korea everything they wanted, creating the legitimacy by having a meeting with Kim Jong-un, who's a thug, although he points out that I'm a rabid dog, need to be beaten with a stick. Recently was his comment.
Other than that, you like him.
Other than that, I like him. And uniting Japan and Australia and being a Pacific power and putting pressure on China in order for them to make sure that it is a nuclear-free peninsula. And the way we do that is we make clear to China, which I have done personally with the president of China, and that is we're going to move up our defenses. We're going to continue to make sure we increase our relationship with South Korea. And if they view that as a threat, it's an easy thing to respond to. They, can put pressure on North Korea. But the fact is that we're in a position where he has done this across the world. He's embraced thugs. Look what Putin is doing in Europe. Putin his whole effort is to break up NATO, to increase his power. Look what he's done to it. And so this guy has no idea what he's doing. He has no notion how to go about it. And we need a commander-in-chief. When he stands, everybody knows what he or she is talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. 2 more U.S. soldiers were killed today in Afghanistan, tragically, in America's longest war. Senator Sanders, you've long said you want to bring the troops back home from Afghanistan. Would you cut a deal with the Taliban to end the war, even if it means the collapse of the Afghan government that America has long supported?
Well, let me just say this. One of the big differences between the Vice President and myself is he supported the terrible war in Iraq, and I helped lead the opposition against it. And not only that, I voted against the very first Gulf War as well. And I think we need a foreign policy which understands who our enemies are, that we don't have to spend more money on the military than the next 10 nations combined. But to answer your question, yeah, I think it is time, after spending many trillions of dollars on these endless wars, which have resulted in more dislocation and mass migrations and pain in that region, it is time to bring our troops home. But unlike Trump, I will not do it through a tweet at 3 o'clock in the morning. I will do it working with the international community. And if it's necessary to negotiate with the Taliban, of course, we will do that. But at the end of the day, we have to rethink the entire war on terror, which has caused so much pain and lost so many lives, not only for our own men and women in the armed forces, but for people in that region as well.
Thank you, Senator. Ashley?
Thank you. Mr. Yang, if you win the 2020 election, what would you say in your first call with Russian President Vladimir Putin?
Well, first I'd say, I'm sorry I beat your guy.
Ouch.
Or not sorry. Not sorry. And second, I would say the days of meddling in American elections are over, and we will take any undermining of our democratic processes as an act of hostility and aggression. The American people would back me on this. We know that they found an underbelly and they've been clawing at it, and it's made it so that we can't even trust our own democracy. The third thing I would say is that we're going to live up to our international commitments. We're going to recommit to our partnerships and alliances, including NATO. And it was James Mattis that said that the more you invest in diplomats and diplomacy, the less you have to spend on ammunition. That has to be the path forward to help build an international consensus, not just against Russia, but also to build a coalition that will help us put pressure on China in terms of their treatment of their ethnic minorities and what's going on in Hong Kong. I want to propose a new world data organization, like a WTO for data, because right now, unfortunately, we're living in a world where data is the new oil and we don't have our arms around it. These are the ways that we'll actually get Russia to the table and make it so they have to join the international community and stop resisting appeals to the world order.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Rachel?
On the issue of China, Senator Booker, China is now using force against demonstrators in Hong Kong, where millions have taken to the streets advocating for democratic reforms. Many of the demonstrators are asking the United States for help. If you were president, would the U.S. help their movement, and how?
Well, first of all, this is a president who seems to want to go up against China in a trade war by pulling away from our allies and, in fact, attacking them as well. We used a national security waiver to put tariffs on Canada. And so at the very time that China is breaking international rules, is practicing unfair practices, stealing technology, forcing technology transfer, and violating human rights, this nation is pulling away from critical allies we would need to show strength against China. There's a larger battle going on the planet Earth right now between totalitarian dictatorial countries and free democracies. And we see the scorecard under this president not looking so good, with China actually shifting more towards an authoritarian government, with its leader now getting rid of term limits. And so I believe we need a much stronger policy, one that's not led, as President Trump seems to want to do, in a transactional way, but one that's led by American values. So yes, we will call China out for its human rights violations, but not only that, we will stop engaging in things that violate American rights. Because it is a human rights violation when people at our border, children are thrown in cages. It's a human rights violations without coming to the United States Congress for an authorization to the use of military force for us to refuel Saudi jets to bomb Yemeni children. It is about time that this country is led by someone who will say the values of freedom and democracy are what we are going to lead with, and begin to check China, check Putin, and the other folks that are trying to undermine American values and democratic values around the globe.
Thank you, Senator. Andrew.
Mr. Vice President, the CIA has concluded that the leader of Saudi Arabia directed the murder of U.S.-based journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The State Department also says the Saudi government is responsible for executing nonviolent offenders and for torture. President Trump has not punished senior Saudi leaders. Would you?
Yes, and I said it at the time. Khashoggi was in fact murdered and dismembered, and I believe in the order of the Crown Prince. And I would make it very clear, we were not going to, in fact, sell more weapons to them. We were going to, in fact, make them pay the price and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are. There's very little social redeeming value in the present government in Saudi Arabia. And I would also, as pointed out, I would end the subsidies that we have and the sale of material to the Saudis, who they're going in and murdering children and they're murdering innocent people. And so they have to be held accountable. And with regard to China, we should look, unless we make it clear that we stand for human rights, we should be going to the United Nations seeking condemnation of China, what they're doing with 1 million Uyghurs that are there essentially in concentration camps in the West. We should be vocally speaking out about the violation of the commitment they made to Hong Kong. We have to speak out and speak loudly about violations of human rights.
Senator Klobuchar, just to follow up, would you go against the Saudis, even though that would potentially help Iran, their adversaries?
We need a new foreign policy in this country, and that means renewing our relationships with our allies. It means rejoining international agreements, and it means reasserting our American values. And so when the president did not stand up the way he should have to that killing and that dismemberment of a journalist with an American newspaper, that sent a signal to all dictators across the country, that across the world, that that was okay, and that's wrong. And I want to add a few things to what my colleagues have said. First of all, the question about Russia. When we look at international agreements, we must start negotiating back with Russia, which has been a horrible player on the international scene. But the president precipitously got out of the nuclear agreement with Russia, and we must start negotiating, even though they were cheating, for the good of this world. And we must also start the negotiations for the New START treaty. And when it comes to China, we need someone that sees the long term, like I do, just like the Chinese do, because we have a president that literally makes decisions based on his next tweet, and they are in it for the long game.
Senator Sanders?
I think I may have been the first person up here to make it clear that Saudi Arabia not only murdered Khashoggi, but this is a brutal dictatorship which does everything it can to crush democracy, treats women as third-class citizens. And when we rethink our American foreign policy, what we have got to know is that Saudi Arabia is not a reliable ally. We have got to bring Iran and Saudi Arabia together in a room under American leadership and say we are sick and tired of us spending huge amounts of money and human resources because of your conflicts. And by the way, the same thing goes with Israel and the Palestinians. It is no longer good enough for us simply to be pro-Israel. I am pro-Israel. But we must treat the Palestinian people as well with the respect and dignity that they deserve. What is going on in Gaza right now, where youth unemployment is 70 or 80%, is unsustainable. So we need to be rethinking who our allies are around the world, work with the United Nations, and not continue to support brutal dictatorships.
Thank you, Senator. Rachel?
Senator Warren, only about 1% of Americans serve in the United States military right now. Should that number be higher?
Yes, I think it should be. You know, all three of my brothers served in the military. One was career military. The other two also served. I think it's an important part of who we are as Americans. And I think the notion of shared service is important. It's how we help bring our nation together. It's how people learn to work together from different regions, people who grew up differently. It's also about how families share that sacrifice. I remember what it was like when I was a little girl. My brother, my oldest brother, who served 5.5 years off and on in combat in Vietnam, and what it was like for my mother every day to check the mailbox. Had we heard from Don Reed? How's he doing? And if there was a letter, she was brighter than the day. And if it wasn't, she'd say, well, maybe tomorrow. This is about building for our entire nation. And I believe we should do that. I also believe we should have other service opportunities in this country. So for example, what I want to do is for our federal lands, I want to bring in 10,000 people who want to be able to serve in our federal lands, to be able to help rebuild our national forests and national parks as a way to express both their public service and their commitment to fighting back against climate change. We can do this as a nation.
Thank you, Senator. In President Trump's first 2 years in office, the Pentagon budget ballooned. Mayor Buttigieg, would you cut military spending or would you keep it on the same upward trajectory?
We need to reprioritize our budget as a whole and our military spending in particular. It's not just how much, although we certainly need to look at the runaway growth in military spending. It's also where. Right now, we are spending a fraction of the intention and resources on things like the artificial intelligence research that China is doing right now. If we fall behind on artificial intelligence, the most expensive ships that the United States is building just turn into bigger targets. We do not have a 21st century security strategy coming from this president. After all, he's relying on 17th century security technologies like a moat full of alligators or a big wall. There is no concept of strategic planning for how civilian, diplomatic, and military security work needs to take place for the future.
Can I respond?
Mayor Buttigieg, thank you.
Respond on this.
Coming up, we will have much more from the candidates. We're going to take a quick break. Just a moment. Stay with us.
I just want to jump in if you're listening. Thank you so much for being here. Is this all with the whole, public hearings with the impeachment? This is a lot to take in. And I know a lot of us are trying to keep track of all this stuff, but I just really appreciate everyone being here, supporting my YouTube channel. It means a lot to me, and to have friends to watch this with is awesome. So thank you. Appreciate it. Quick plug here. I am starting in January. We're going to be starting the panels, subject panels, and I would love anybody who feels comfortable doing so to, take a spot and come on in. It'll be no big deal, just very cash. And I just wanted to make sure everyone knew about them. They're going to be starting in January. And of course, I'm going to be sending stuff out in December to get people to sign up. I'll do whatever it takes, or at least send other people my way if you don't want to do it yourself. All right, I'm shutting up now. It's a miracle. Thanks for being here.
Racial divide among Democratic voters. Let's take a closer look here. What you see, this is our latest NBC News Wall Street Journal national poll of the Democratic race. This is what it looks like overall. You're probably pretty familiar by now. Joe Biden continues to lead nationally. It's a narrow lead for him over Elizabeth Warren. She's moved up. Bernie Sanders showing some resilience here, right behind Warren. Everybody else back in single digits, some even lower, not even on the screen here. That's the overall state of the race. But now let's take a look, because the divide that's emerged when it comes to age, when it comes to what generation voters are part of, it's pretty stark. So look at this. Look at the oldest group of Democratic voters, first of all, 65 years and older. This looks a little different, doesn't it? Look at that. Joe Biden, well over 40%, 44%, the runaway leader with the oldest group of Democratic voters. By the way, there are a lot of Democratic voters who are 65 plus. There are a lot of voters who are 65 plus. Second place, way back, nearly 30 points back, Elizabeth Warren. How about this? Third place, the only other candidate in double digits with older voters right now, Amy Klobuchar. Again, look at this. If you go back to the overall number, Klobuchar is just at 5%. If you go to the oldest group of voters, she's almost triple that. She's up at 13%. Then Bernie Sanders has been struggling. This was a story for him back in 2016 when he ran against Hillary Clinton. It is a story for him now. The older the voters get on the Democratic side, the worse Bernie Sanders does. He's back there at 7%. You got Buttigieg, you get Harris, Andrew Yang, zero support, 65 plus. Damn. So that's the oldest end of the spectrum. How about the other end, the youngest group of voters, those under 35 years old, 18 to 34 years old? Check this out. Totally different story. Bernie Sanders, runaway leader in first place. Warren in second. Look at Biden, barely hitting double digits. Yang suddenly goes from 0% here to 9% there. Harris, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar, 1% down here compared to 13% up here. Two totally different visions of the campaign based on two totally different age groups. Big question here, obviously, who's going to turn out and vote the most? We know voters, older voters tend to vote pretty frequently, tend to vote pretty actively. What about younger voters? How active are they going to be when it comes to showing up and voting? Key question as these primaries get going.
The intersection where rigid government policy and human compassion collide. We see this for the first time in hometowns across this country.
Stevie, hello. Yay, I'm happy you're here. I'm not supposed to be talking.
Welcome back, everyone, to the 5th Democratic debate. Let's move now to the issue of race in America. FBI Director Christopher Wray recently told Congress, quote, "The majority of the domestic terrorism cases that we've investigated are motivated by white supremacist violence." Congresswoman Gabbard, to you, as president, would you direct the federal government to do something about this problem that it is not currently doing?
Yes, I would. We have seen for far too long the kind of racial bigotry, divisiveness, and attacks that have unfortunately taken the lives of our fellow Americans.
Leadership starts at the top. It's important that we set the record straight and correct the racial injustices that exist in a very institutional way in our country, beginning with things that have to do with our criminal justice system, where predominantly the failed war on drugs that has been continuing to be waged in this country has disproportionately impacted people of color and people in poverty. This is something that I'll do as President and Commander-in-Chief, is to overhaul our criminal justice system, working in a bipartisan way to do things like end the failed war on drugs, end the money bail system, enact the kinds of prison reforms and sentencing reforms that we need to see that will correct the failures of the past. The most important thing here is that we recognize that we have to treat each other with respect, all of us as fellow Americans, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, gender, orientation, and our politics. That kind of leadership starts at the top. As president, I will usher in a 21st century White House that actually represents the interests of all Americans first and foremost.
Congresswoman Gabbard, thank you for that. Mr. Yang, what would you do about the issue of white supremacist violence?
Well, first we have to designate white supremacist terrorism as domestic terrorism so that the Department of Justice can properly measure it.
Thank you. Sorry.
I talked to an anti-hate activist named Christian Picciolini, who told me about how he was radicalized over a 10-year period. He said he was a lonely 14-year-old and that he was reached out to by a hate group, and he wound up joining it for a decade. Now he's out and he's helping convert people out of those hate groups and back into the rest of society. But what he told me was that if anyone had reached out to him when he was that hurt, broken 14-year-old boy, he would have gone with them. He said if it had been a coach, I would have gone with him. If it had been a mentor or teacher, I would have gone with them. But instead, it was a hate group. So what we have to do is we have to get into the roots of our communities and create paths forward for men in particular who right now are falling through the cracks. And when you look at gun violence in this country, 96+% of the shooters we're talking about are young boys and young men. We have to, as a country, start finding ways to turn our boys into healthy, strong young men who do not hate, but instead feel like they have paths forward in today's economy.
Mr. Yang, thank you for that. Vice President Biden, the Me Too movement has forced a cultural reckoning around the issue of sexual violence and harassment against women in America. Are there specific actions that you would take early in your administration to address this problem?
Yes, and by the way, it's one of the reasons, the first thing I would do is make sure we pass the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization, which I wrote. The fact I didn't write the reauthorization, I wrote the original act. The fact is that what happens now is that we, in fact, have to fundamentally change the culture of how women are treated. That's why, as vice president, when I asked the president I could start the movement on the college campuses to say, it's on us. It's everyone's responsibility. We do not spend nearly enough time dealing with, I was stunned when I did a virtual town meeting and told me 30,000 people were on the call, young people between 15 and 25, and found out, I said, what do you need to make you safer on college campuses and in your schools? You know what they said? Get men involved. Engage the rest of the community. And that's when we started this movement on the college campuses to fundamentally change the culture. No man has a right to raise a hand to a woman in anger other than in self-defense, and that's rarely ever occurs. And so we have to just change the culture, period, and keep punching at it and punching at it and punching at it. It will be a big, no, I really mean it. It's a gigantic issue, and we have to make it clear from the top, from the president on down, that we will not.
Yeah, the punching thing. I don't know about that. That was like.
This culture.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. Senator Harris, this week you criticized Mayor Pete Buttigieg's outreach to African-American voters. You said, quote, the Democratic nominee has got to be someone who has the experience of connecting with all of who we are as the diversity of the American people, end quote. What exactly prompted you to say that, Senator Harris?
Well, that was asked a question that related to a stock photograph that his campaign published. But listen, I think that it really speaks to a larger issue, and I'll speak to the larger issue. I believe that the mayor has made apologies for that. The larger issue is that for too long, I think candidates have taken for granted constituencies that have been the backbone of the Democratic Party and have overlooked those constituencies. And they show up when it's, close to election time, show up in a black church and want to get the vote, but just haven't been there before. I mean, there are plenty of people who applauded black women for the success of the 2018 election, applauded black women for the election of a senator from Alabama. But at some point, folks get tired of just saying, thank me for showing up, and say, well, show up for me. Because when black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in connection with childbirth in America, when the sons of black women will die because of gun violence more than any other cause of death, when black women make 61 cents on the dollar as compared to all women who tragically make 80 cents on the dollar, the question has to be, where you been and what are you gonna do? And do you understand who the people are? And I'm running for president because I believe that we have to have leadership in this country who has worked with and have the experience of working with all folks. And we've got to recreate the Obama coalition to win. And that means about women, that's people of color, that's our LGBTQ community, that's working people, that's our labor unions. But that is how we are going to win this election, and I intend to win.
Senator Harris, thank you. Mayor Buttigieg, your response to that?
My response is I completely agree. And I welcome the challenge of connecting with black voters in America who don't yet know me. And before I share what's in my plans, let me talk about what's in my heart and why this is so important. As mayor of a city that is racially diverse and largely low income, for 8 years, I have lived and breathed the successes and struggles of a community where far too many people live with the consequences of racial inequity that is built up over centuries, but been compounded by policies and decisions from within living memory. I care about this because my faith teaches me that salvation has to do with how I make myself useful to those who have been excluded, marginalized, and cast aside and oppressed in society. And I care about this because while I do not have the experience of ever having been discriminated against because of the color of my skin, I do have the experience of sometimes feeling like a stranger in my own country, turning on the news and seeing my own rights come up for debate, and seeing my rights expanded by a coalition of people like me and people not at all like me, working side by side, shoulder to shoulder, making it possible for me to be standing here wearing this wedding ring in a way that couldn't have happened 2 elections ago. Lets me know just how deep my obligation is to help those whose rights are on the line every day, even if they are nothing like me in their experience.
Mayor Buttigieg, thank you very much. Senator Harris, what response?
Look, there's a lot at stake in this election. And I've said it many times, I think justice is on the ballot in 2020. And it's about economic justice. It's about justice for children. It's about justice for our teachers. I could go on down the list. And so the issue really is not what is the fight. The issue has to be how we're going to win. And to win, we have to build a coalition and rebuild the Obama coalition. I keep referring to that because that's the last time we won. And the way that election looked and what that coalition looked like was it was about having a leader who had worked in many communities, knows those communities, and has the ability to bring people together. And everyone is going to have to be judged on their experience and therefore ability to bring folks together around our commonalities, of which I believe there are many.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Warren, quickly.
So I think it is really important that we actually talk about what we're willing to get in the fight for. And I just want to give one example around this. Senator Harris rightly raised the question of economic justice. Let me give a specific example, and that is student loan debt. Right now in America, African Americans are more likely to borrow money to go to college, borrow more money while they're in college, and have a harder time paying that debt off after they get out. Today in America, a new study came out, 20 years out, whites who borrowed money, 90 94% of them have paid off their student loan debt. 5% of African Americans have paid it off. I believe that means everyone on the stage should be embracing student loan debt forgiveness. It will help close the black-white wealth gap. Let's do something tangible and real to make change in this country.
Senator Warren, thank you. Ashley.
Senator Warren, back to you. You said that the border wall that President Trump has proposed is, quote, a monument to hate and division. Would you ask taxpayers to pay to take down any part of the wall on the nation's southern border?
If there are parts of the wall that are not useful in our defense, of course we should do it. The real point here is that we need to stop this man-made crisis at the border. Trump is the one who has created this crisis, and he has done it in no small part by helping destabilize the governments even further in Central America. He has withdrawn aid. That means that families have to flee for their lives, have to flee for any economic opportunity. You know, when I found out that our government was actually taking away children from their families, I went down to the border. I went down there immediately. I was in McAllen, Texas, and I just hope everyone remembers what this looks like. There's like a giant Amazon warehouse filled with cages of women, cages of men, and cages of little girls and little boys. I spoke to a woman who was in the cage of nursing mothers, and she told me she'd given a drink to a police officer, and that the word had come down from the gangs that she was helping the police. She knew what that meant. She wrapped up her baby and she ran for the border. We need to treat the people who come here with dignity and with respect. A great nation does not separate children from their families. We need to live our values at the border every single day.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Booker, a quick response.
Look, I want to be quick on this because I'd like to get back to something that wasn't included in
So would we all.
Absolutely. If this is not effective, we see people cutting holes in his wall, what he brags about is just wrong. We need to have policies that respect dignity, keep us safe and strong. I wanted to return back to this issue of black voters. I have a lifetime of experience with black voters. I've been one since I was 18. Nobody on the stage should need a focus group to hear from African-American voters. Black voters are pissed off and they're worried. They're pissed off because the only time our issues seem to be really paid attention to by politicians is when people are looking for their vote. And they're worried because the Democratic Party, we don't want to see people miss this opportunity and lose because we are nominating someone that isn't trusted, doesn't have authentic connection. And so that's what's on the ballot. And issues do matter. I have a lot of respect for the vice president. He has sworn me into my office as a hero. This week, I hear him literally say that I don't think we should legalize marijuana. I thought you might have been high when you said it. Let me tell you, because marijuana,
It's actually very funny.
Marijuana in our country is already legal for privileged people, and the war on drugs has been a war on black and brown people. So let me just say this. With more African Americans under criminal supervision in America than all the slaves since 1850, do not roll up into communities and not talk directly to issues that are going to relate to the liberation of children, because there are people in Congress right now that admit to smoking marijuana, while there are people, our kids are in jail right now for those drug crimes. And so these are the kind of issues that mean a lot to our community, and if we don't have somebody authentically, we lost the last election. Let me just give you this data example. We lost in Wisconsin because of a massive diminution, a lot of reasons, but there was a massive diminution in the African-American vote. We need to have someone that can inspire, as Kamala said, to inspire African-Americans to the polls at record numbers.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Vice President Biden, you can respond to that.
I'll be very brief. Number one, I think we should decriminalize marijuana, period. And I think anyone who has a a record, should be let out of jail, their records expunged, and be completely zeroed out. But I do think it makes sense, based on data, that we should study what the long-term effects are for the use of marijuana. That's all it is. Number one, everybody gets out, record expunged. Secondly, I'm part of that Obama coalition. I come out of the Black community in terms of my support. If you notice, I have more people supporting me in the Black community that have announced for me because they know me. They know who I am. 3 former chairs of the Black Caucus. The only Black African-American woman that ever been elected to the United States Senate. A whole range of people. My point is,
that's not true. The other one is true.
I said the first. I said the first African-American elected. So my point is, one of the reasons I was picked to be vice president was because of my relationship, long-standing relationship with the Black community. I was part of that coalition.
Thank you, Krista.
And we do have to take another quick break, but we are going to hear much more from the candidates when we come right back here in Atlanta, Georgia. Stay with us.
The intersection where rigid government policy and human compassion.
So what do you guys think? They are bringing up some interesting stuff. I definitely am thrilled they're talking about people of color, Black people, and actually focusing a little bit, not a ton, but at least more on the issues, that the inequality and the inequity. So what do you guys think? I hope you're it's and the student loan stuff, and it's just really tough. We're going through a lot in this nation. Trump needs to leave, and he needs to take all his little Klan friends with him. I'm not going to do a commentary. I'll listen to this guy, but thanks for being here, everybody. I really appreciate it.
It matters greatly. If you win early, you got momentum. If you lose early, that could be curtains for you. So we thought we would take a look at the sequence, the calendar, because it's going to get going soon here on the Democratic side. And of course, the first state to get a say in the 2020 race, it's going to be, as always, the Hawkeye state, Iowa. Mark your calendar, Monday night, February 3rd, 2020, the Iowa caucuses are going to be held. They're already talking about potentially record-shattering turnout. These are caucus meetings where you got to go for a few hours. You don't just show up, cast a ballot, put it in a box, and leave. These are meetings where you're there for a few hours. Groups of supporters stand on one side of the room for one candidate, the other side of the room for the other candidate. There's multiple rounds of voting, very complicated. In the past, it's been only sort of diehard activists who've gone. This year, they're expecting far more people to go. And of course, the winner of Iowa gets the famous term for this. George Bush Sr. won Iowa once many years ago. He said, I've got the big mo now, momentum. That's what you get if you win Iowa. 8 days later, they go to the Granite State. They go to New Hampshire. New Hampshire, not a caucus state, a primary state. You go from first in the nation caucuses in Iowa to the first in the nation primary in New Hampshire. Big question there. Can a candidate put together a win in Iowa and roll it into a win in New Hampshire? In the modern history of Democratic primary politics, every single candidate who has won both Iowa and New Hampshire has gone on to win the Democratic nomination. Will there be a candidate who does that 1-2 punch this year? And will that candidate then be the nominee? Well, let's see. Then you got to go a little bit more than a week later. Nevada, this one for a few cycles now. The Nevada caucuses have been the third event on the Democratic side. Big presence there, especially for unions. First time a large Hispanic population gets a voice. Nevada, and a week after that, very end of February, the South Carolina primary. The electorate probably 60% African-American. So we've talked about Joe Biden's strength with African-American voters. That's why his campaign has been saying South Carolina. That's where he's got a firewall. Question, of course, for Biden, if he doesn't do too well in these first 3 states, does that firewall hold in South Carolina? So February 2020 is going to tell us, they always say it's these first few contests that winnow the Democratic field. This is your winnowing calendar.
Winnow, huh?
The journey has begun. It'll take us through the debate stages, along the trails of Iowa and New Hampshire, onward to the town halls and convention halls, into the spin rooms and ballrooms. And as this journey unfolds, we'll be on the ground, at the big board, navigating the twists and turns every step of the way.
More Americans watch NBC News than any other news organization in the world.
Welcome back to the MSNBC Washington Post Democratic Candidates Debate. Many states, including right here where we are tonight in Georgia, have passed laws that severely limit or outright ban abortion. Right now, Roe versus Wade protects a woman's right to abortion nationwide. But if Roe gets overturned and abortion access disappears in some states, would you intervene as president to try to bring that access back, Senator Klobuchar?
Well, of course, we should codify Roe v. Wade into law. That is what we should do. And this president indicated early on what he was going to do, and he's done it. When he was running for office, he literally said women should go to jail. Then he dialed it back and said doctors should go to jail. So no surprise that we're seeing these kinds of laws in Georgia and Alabama, where his allies are passing these bills. And what we have to remember is that the people are with us. And I predict this will be a big election issue in the general election. And I just can't wait to stand across from Donald Trump and say this to him. You know what? The people are with us. Over 70% of the people support Roe v. Wade. Over 90% of the people support funding for Planned Parenthood and making sure that women can get the health care they need. He is off the track on this, and he will hear from the women of America, and this is how we're going to win this election.
Just this weekend, Louisiana reelected a Democratic governor, John Bel Edwards. He has signed one of the country's toughest laws restricting abortion. Is there room in the Democratic Party for someone like him? Someone who can win in a deep red state, but who does not support abortion rights? Senator Warren.
Look, I believe that abortion rights are human rights. I believe that they are also economic rights. And protecting the right of a woman to be able to make decisions about her own body is fundamentally what we do and what we stand for as a Democratic Party. Understand this. When someone makes abortion illegal in America, rich women will still get abortions. It's just going to fall hard on poor women. It's going to fall hard on girls, women who don't even know that they're pregnant because they have been molested by an uncle. I want to be in America where everybody has a chance. And I know it can be a hard decision for people, but here's the thing. When it comes down to that decision, a woman should be able to call on her mother. She should be able to call on her partner. She should be able to call on her priest or her rabbi. But the one entity that should not be in the middle of that decision is the government.
Senator Warren, I'm going to push you on this a little bit for a specific answer to the question. Governor John Bel Edwards in Louisiana is an anti-abortion governor who has signed abortion restrictions in Louisiana. Is there room for him in the Democratic Party with those politics?
I have made clear what I think the Democratic Party stands for. I'm not here to try to drive anyone out of this party. I'm not here to try to build fences, but I am here to say this is what I will fight for as President of the United States. The women of America can count.
Senator Warren, thank you. Senator Sanders, I'll give you 30 seconds.
Amy mentioned that women feel strongly on it. Well, let me just tell you that if there's ever a time in American history where the men of this country must stand with the women, this is the moment. And I get very tired of hearing the hypocrisy from conservatives who say, get the government off our backs. We want small government. Well, if you want to get the government out of the backs of the American people, then understand that it is women who control their own bodies, not politicians.
Senator Sanders, Senator Booker.
This is a voting issue. This is a voter suppression issue. Right here in this great state of Georgia, it was the voter suppression, particularly of African-American communities, that prevented us from having a Governor Stacey Abrams right now. And that is, when you have undemocratic means, when you suppress people's votes to get elected, those are the very people you're going to come after when you're in office. And this bill, opposed by over 70% The heartbeat bill here, proposed by over 70% of Georgians, is the result from voter suppression. This gets back to the issue about making sure we are fighting every single day that whoever is the nominee, they can overcome the attempts to suppress the votes, particularly of low-income and minority voters, and particularly in the Black community that we saw here in Georgia.
Senator Booker, thank you. And to that point, individual states, as you all know, set their own rules for voting and for elections. Depending on where you live, you may be required to show ID or not. You might have a lot of days for early voting, or fewer days, or none. You might have a polling place in walking distance, or you might have to drive or take a bus to the edge of town. With that in mind, our next question comes from Jenna in Maryland, who asks, what will you do at the executive level to ensure that every American has equal access to the ballot box? Mayor Buttigieg.
Well, we need federal leadership to establish voting rights for the 21st century, because this affects every other issue that we care about. Now, the House of Representatives passed a pro-democracy, anti-corruption bill, which is one of many good bills to die in Mitch McConnell's hands in the United States Senate. We know that with the White House in the right hands, we can make, for example, election days a federal holiday. We can use carrots and sticks to induce states to do the right thing with automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, making it easier for people to vote, and in particular, recognizing that we cannot allow the kind of racially motivated or partisan voter suppression or gerrymandering that often dictates the outcome of election before the voting even begins. Right now, we have politicians picking out their voters rather than the other way around. That, compounding with what is being done to restrict the right to vote, means that our democracy is not worthy of the name. These process issues are not always fashionable. We must act to reform our democracy itself, including when it comes to choosing our presidency. What we do in every election, giving it to the person who got the most votes.
I agree with what the mayor has just said, but this is a good example where he has said the right words, but I actually have the experience and am leading 11 of the bills that are in that House passed bill you just referred to. And I think this kind of experience matters. I have been devoted to this from the time that I've got to the Senate. And I think having that experience, knowing how you can get things done, leading the bills to take the social media companies to task, a bipartisan bill to say, yeah, you have to say where these ads come from and how they're paid for, and stop the unbelievable practice where we still have 11 states that don't have backup paper ballots. That is my bipartisan bill, and I am so close to getting it done. And the way I get it done is if I'm president. But just like I have won statewide, and Mayor, I have all appreciation for your good work as a local official, and you did not when you tried, I also have actually done this work. I think experience should matter.
Mayor Buttigieg, I'll let you respond to that.
So first of all, Washington experience is not the only experience that matters. There's more than 100 years of Washington experience on this stage. And where are we right now as a country? Ouch. I have the experience of bringing people together to get something done. I have the experience of being commanded into a war zone by an American president. I have the experience of knowing what is at stake as the decisions made in those big white buildings come into our lives, our homes, our families, our workplaces, and our marriages. And I would submit that this is the kind of experience we need, not just to go to Washington, but to change it before it is too late.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Congresswoman Garrett, on the original question of voting rights, please.
I mean, voting rights are essential for our democracy. Securing our elections is essential for our democracy. I've introduced legislation called the Securing America's Elections Act that mandates paper ballots to make sure that every single voter's voice is heard. But I want to get back to Pete Buttigieg and his comments about experience. Pete, you'll agree that the service that we both have provided to our country as veterans by itself does not qualify us to serve as commander-in-chief. I think the most recent example of your inexperience in national security and foreign policy came from your recent careless statement about how you as president would be willing to send our troops to Mexico to fight the cartels. As commander-in-chief, leader of our armed forces, I bring extensive experience serving for 7 years in Congress. on the Foreign Affairs Committee, on the Armed Services Committee, on the Homeland Security Committee, meeting with leaders of countries around the world, working with military commanders of different commands, dealing with high-level national security briefings, understanding what's necessary, the preparation that I've gotten to walk in on day one to serve as Commander-in-Chief.
Congresswoman, thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'll allow you to respond.
I know that it's par for the course in Washington to take remarks out of context, but that is outlandish even by the standards of today's politics.
Are you saying that you didn't say that?
I was talking about U.S.-Mexico cooperation. We've been doing security cooperation with Mexico for years, with law enforcement cooperation and a military relationship that could continue to be developed with training relationships, for example. Do you seriously think anybody on this stage is proposing invading Mexico?
That's not what I said.
I'm talking about building up alliances. And if your question is about experience, let's also talk about judgment. One of the foreign leaders you mentioned meeting was Bashar al-Assad. I have, in my experience, such as it is, whether you think it counts or not, since it wasn't accumulated in Washington, enough judgment that I would not have sat down with a murderous dictator like that.
Congresswoman Gabbard, let me allow you to respond.
Thank you. You were asked directly whether you would send our troops to Mexico to fight cartels, and your answer was yes. The fact checkers can check this out. But your point about judgment is absolutely correct. Our Commander-in-Chief does need to have good judgment. And what you've just pointed out is that you would lack the courage to meet with both adversaries and friends to ensure the peace and national security of our nation. I take the example of those leaders who have come before us, leaders like JFK, who met with Khrushchev, like Roosevelt, who met with Stalin, like Reagan, who met and worked with Gorbachev. These issues of national security are incredibly important. I will meet with and do what is necessary to make sure that no more of our brothers and sisters in uniform are needlessly sent into harm's way fighting regime change wars that undermine our national security. I'll bring real leadership and experience to the White House.
Senator Sanders.
Original point. The American people understand that the political system we have today is corrupt. And it is not just voter suppression, which cost the Democratic Party a governorship here in this state, not just denying black people, people of color, the right to vote, but we also have a system through Citizens United, which allows billionaires to buy elections. So what we need to do, simple and straightforward, in every state in this country, to the federal government. If you are 18, you have a right to vote. End of discussion. We have to overturn Citizens United. We need to move towards public funding of elections.
On this last point, Mr. Steyer.
Well, I agree with exactly what Bernie said, but I want to talk about how we're going to win in 2020. I don't mean to change the subject, but I think it's sort of important that the Democratic Party not only beat Donald Trump in 2020, but have a sweeping victory across the country. And what that's going to mean is turnout. In the United States of America, the Democratic Party keeps talking about trying to persuade a few people who are Republicans to like us, when up to half the people don't vote at all because they think neither party tells the truth. No one deals with my issues. The system is broken. Why would we vote? But what we've found at Next Gen America is that is the start of a conversation about why votes are so important. And if you look at 2018 and flipping the House, what really happened was Democratic voting went up by 3/4. In the 38 congressional districts where Next Gen America was turning out young people, the turnout went up by more than 100%, more than double. So for us to win, for everybody on this stage, for whoever is the candidate, to have a Senate that's Democratic, for us to have the sweeping victory that we absolutely are going to have next year, it's a turnout question. We're going to have to tell the truth, and we're going to have to organize across this country.
Thank you very much. It is time, at this point, it is well past time, if I'm honest, to start closing statements. And we are going to start tonight with Senator Booker. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rachel. It's an honor to be here tonight. I have not yet qualified for the December stage and need your help to do that. If you believe in my voice and that I should be up here, please go to corybooker.com. Please help. I had a closing statement prepared, but I saw in the audience during the break a man named John Lewis. And perhaps it's interesting and important for me to mention why I'm so grateful to him. I've been calling in this whole election for our need to fight and fight the right way by bringing people together to create transformative change, not just beat Donald Trump. That's the floor. We need to go to the ceiling. We need to go to the mountaintop. I am literally here on this stage right now because 50 years ago, there was a lawyer on a couch who changed his life, changed his mind to get up and start representing families, one of them mine, who were discriminated against. The house I grew up in is because of that lawyer's activity. When I asked him why he did what he did, he told me that on March 7th, 1965, he was watching a movie called Judgment at Nuremberg on TV, and they interrupted that movie to show a bridge in Alabama called the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And there he saw John Lewis and other marchers who were beaten viciously by Alabama state troopers. We all owe a debt that we cannot repay. We all drink deeply from wells of freedom and liberty that we did not dig. This is the moment in America where we need a leader that can inspire us to get up and fight again. That we have truly a moral moment in America like it was back in 1965. If you give me a chance to lead, I will cause what John Lewis says is good trouble. I will challenge us. I will ask more from you than any other president has ever asked before, because we need to mobilize a new American movement. Keep me on this stage. Keep me on this race. It is time we fight and fight together. Please go to corybooker.com.
Senator Booker, thank you very much.
Mr. Steyer, your closing statement.
Last time I was on this stage, I started by saying that everybody here is more patriotic and more competent than the criminal in the White House. And I stand by that statement. But I'm different from everybody else on this stage. I know that the government in Washington, D.C. is broken. I know that it's been purchased by corporations. And I've spent a decade putting together coalitions of ordinary American citizens to beat those corporations. I'm the only one on this stage who's willing to talk about structural change in Washington itself, term limits. That if we're going to make bold changes, we're going to need new and different people in charge. I'm the only person on this stage who spent decades building an international business. Whoever of us is the Democratic nominee is going to have to face Mr. Trump or the Republican and talk about the economy, talk about growth, understand that we can make Mr. Trump what he is, a fraud and a failure on the economy, which is his strong point. I'm the only person on this stage who will say that climate is my first priority, that it's our biggest challenge, but it's our biggest opportunity to recreate this country. If you want to beat Mr. Trump, if you want to break the corporate stranglehold on this government, if you want to pass all of the progressive policies that everyone on this stage wants, I'm the person who can do it.
Thank you, Mr. Steyer.
I have spent a decade trusting the American people.
Thank you,
I'm
Mr.
asking
Steyer.
you to trust me.
Thank you.
Congresswoman Gabbard, go ahead.
My personal commitment to you, to all of my fellow Americans, is to treat you with respect and compassion, something that we in Hawaii call aloha. Every single person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of race, religion, or gender, or even your politics. Inclusion, unity, respect, aloha, these will be the operating principles for my administration. Now, Dr. Martin Luther King visited Hawaii first back in 1959, where he expressed his appreciation for what we call the aloha spirit. He said, "We look to you for inspiration as a bold example for what you have already succeeded in the areas of racial harmony and racial justice, where we are still struggling to achieve in other sections of the country." He later went on to say, "As I looked out at the various faces in various colors mingled together like the waters of the sea, I see only one face, the face of the future." Working side by side, let's defeat the divisiveness of Donald Trump. Come together and usher in a 21st century of racial harmony, of racial justice, peace, inclusion, and true equality. Working side by side, Let's make Dr. King's dream our reality.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Mr. Yang, your turn.
I'm here with my wife, Evelyn, tonight. We have two young boys, Christopher and Damien. How many of you all are parents like us here in the room? So if you're a parent, you've had this thought, maybe you've been afraid to express it, and it is this: our kids are not all right. They're not all right because we're leaving them a future that is far darker than the lives that we have led as their parents. We're going through the greatest economic transformation in our country's history, the fourth industrial revolution, and it is pushing more and more of our people to the side. We talk as if Donald Trump is the cause of all of our problems. He is not. He is a symptom, and we need to cure the disease. Now, my first move was not to run for president of the United States, because I am not insane. My first move was to go to DC, talk to our leaders, and say, technology is ripping us apart, immigrants are being scapegoated, our kids are being left behind, and the American dream that my parents came here to find is dying before our eyes. And the people in Washington, D.C. had nothing for this. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to talk about an issue they don't think they have a solution for. I'm not running for president because I fantasized about being president. I'm running for president because, like many of you here in this room tonight, I'm a parent and a patriot, and I have seen the future that we're leaving for our kids, and it is not something I'm willing to accept. We need to create a new way forward for our people. If you want to join us in rewriting the rules of the 21st century economy, go to yang2020.com and make it so that we can look our kids in the eyes and say to them, and believe it, your country loves you, your country values you, and you will be all right.
Thank you, Mr. Yang.
Senator Klobuchar.
The nation was riveted this week by the testimony in Washington. And one of the people we heard from yesterday was Lieutenant Colonel Bideman. And what he said was this: he spoke to his immigrant father, and he said, in this country, you can tell the truth, and it's going to be fine. It reminded me of Army counsel years and years ago in the McCarthy hearing, someone from Iowa, actually, Mr. Welch, who said, have you no sense of decency, sir? I want us to remember that this election is, yes, an economic check on this president. And I have bold ideas that we can do to go forward as a country to make college more affordable and bring down the cost of healthcare, yes. But this is also a patriotism check, a value check, a decency check. And when you look at the people that turned out in Kentucky and turned out in Virginia, people turned out that didn't vote in 2016. African Americans are turning out like we didn't see before. But we also, and they must be with us, and we must get our fired up Democratic base with us. But we also, let's get those independents and moderate Republicans who cannot stomach this guy anymore. This is how we build a coalition. So we don't just beat Donald Trump. We bring the U.S. Senate to some sense. We send Mitch McConnell packing. This is how we win. So if you want to join us, and remember that this won't be for me a personal victory, it'll be a national victory of someone that wins in red districts and suburban purple districts and bright blue districts every single time. If you want to join us, and if you believe that our work doesn't end on election day but begins on inauguration day, join us. AmyKlobuchar.com.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you.
Senator Harris.
So we're in a fight. This is a fight for our rule of law, for our democracy, and for our system of justice. And it's a fight we need to win. And to fight this fight, I believe we have to have the ability to not only have a nominee who can go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump, and I have taken on Jeff Sessions, I've taken on Bill Barr, I've taken on Brett Kavanaugh. I know I have the ability to do that. We also need someone who can unify the party and the country, and who has the experience of having done that. I've done that work. I believe we need someone who has the ability to speak to all the people, regardless of their race, their gender, their party affiliation, where they live geographically, or the language their grandmother speaks. My entire career has been spent having one client and one client only, the people. I have never represented a corporation. I've never represented a special interest. And
in this election, justice and the various injustices people are facing, regardless of where they live or their race or gender, are very much on the ballot, from economic justice to reproductive justice to healthcare justice to educational justice. And I truly believe that when we overcome these injustices, we will then unlock the potential of the American people and the promise of America. And that's the America I believe in. That's the America I see. And that is why I'm running for president.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
Mayor Buttigieg, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I want to remark that we're in the city of Atlanta, a city where a great local leader, Maynard Jackson, helped create the black middle class that Atlanta is known by ensuring that taxpayer dollars were spent in a way that reflected the need to expand opportunity to those who were excluded. And just as local leaders have shown great leadership, we need to use the powers of the presidency on challenges like this, expanding opportunity and expanding a sense of belonging to those who have been excluded in this country. I'm not only running to defeat Donald Trump, I am running to prepare for the day that begins when Donald Trump has left office, to launch the era that must come after Trump. That era must be characterized not by exclusion, but by belonging. And so must our campaign. I am inviting progressives who have agreed on these issues we've been talking about tonight all along, moderates who are ready to be part of this coalition, and a lot of future former Republicans who I know are watching this, disgusted by what is happening in their own party and in this country. I want you to know that everybody is welcome in this movement that we're building, and everybody is welcome in this future that we must create. I hope you go to PeteForAmerica.com, join this effort, and help us create a better era for the American people beginning in November 2020.
Thank you. Senator Sanders.
Thank you. Let me say a word about myself. Unusual as it may seem. I am the son of an immigrant, young man of 17, who came to this country without a nickel in his pocket. I have some sense of the immigrant experience. I will stand with the 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country. At the age of 21, as a member of a civil rights group at the University of Chicago, I was arrested, spent the night in jail, and I have been committed to the fight against all forms of discrimination, racial discrimination, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and religious bigotry. I will lead an administration that will look like America, will end the divisiveness brought by Trump and bring us together. During this campaign, I am proud to say that I have received more campaign contributions than any candidate at this point in an election in American history. Over 4 million contributions, averaging $18 apiece. If you want to be part of a movement that is not only going to beat Trump, but transform America, that doesn't have a super PAC, doesn't do fundraisers at wealthy people's homes, please join us at BernieSanders.com. Thank you.
Senator Warren, the floor is yours.
So, thank you. You know, I listened to this debate tonight, and I hear a lot of really good ideas, but I take a look at the issues we've talked about. We've talked about climate change. We've talked about defense spending. We've talked about private health insurance. We should have talked about gun violence. What do these issues have in common? Well, first, they touch people all over this country in their everyday lives. And what is the second thing they have in common? We know what we need to do. We have a lot of good ideas for how to fix it, and the majority of Americans are with us on it. And yet, we don't make change. Why not? Because of corruption. Because we have a government that works better for big drug companies than it does for people trying to fill a prescription. It works better for a giant defense industry than it does for everyone who worries about the money that goes into arms instead of into our public schools. We have a government that works for those at the top and not for anyone else. I have the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. It involves ending lobbying as we know it, blocking the revolving door between industry and Washington, Washington, making everyone who runs for federal office put their tax returns online. We have to have the courage not to make just individual changes, not to fight for little pieces. We want to make real progress on climate. Then we have to start by attacking the corruption that gives the oil industry and other fossil fuel industries a stranglehold over this country. I am so grateful to be here, and I am grateful to an America that gave the daughter of a janitor a chance to become a public school teacher, a chance to become a college professor, a chance to become a United States senator, and a chance to become a candidate for president of the United States. Thank you.
Vice President Biden, your closing statement.
I assume when we're talking about the corruption of the federal government, we weren't talking about Barack Obama and his spotless administration. He made so much progress. But one thing we haven't talked about here today, we talked about everything. We haven't talked about the one thing I think is most consequential. You know, the American people have an enormous opportunity. There's incredible. I've never been more optimistic about our prospects in my entire career. And I got elected as a 29-year-old kid to the United States Senate. Folks, we are in a position where we're the wealthiest nation in the world. Our workers are more productive than workers around the world, 3 times as productive as workers in Asia. We have more great research universities that the people own than all the rest of the world combined. We're in a position where we've led not by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. I'm so tired of everybody walking around like, woe is me, what are we going to do? Let's remember, this is the United States of America. There has never, ever been a time when we've set our mind to do something we've been unable to do it. Never, never, never. So it's time to remember who we are. Get up. Let's take back this country and lead the world again. It's within our power to do it. Get up and take it back.
Vice President Biden, thank you. And let me take this opportunity to thank all of the candidates for spirited and excellent debate. Well, I want to thank all of you, and I want to tell you that on MSNBC tonight, my colleague Brian Williams is going to pick up our coverage in just a moment. I also, before we go, want to thank everybody here in the audience. I want to thank the city of Atlanta, and from all of us here at the Dallas. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you.
Anyone who's still with me, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to stick around for a little bit in case anybody wants to just chit chat. But interesting, please don't give up on, I know a lot of us are just so jaded to think that anybody cares. But we got to keep hope, guys. It's all we have. We got to keep hope. We can do this. So I'm going to stick around a little bit longer if you have any comments, and then I will say good night. But thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. I'm
of American politics, starting with what started out as a blowtorch of a witness in the House impeachment inquiry, ending just now, as we all saw on the stage in Atlanta. 10 candidates appearing after, for the true believers, what was an 11-hour day for television viewers. The Trump presidency was an early issue on that stage tonight.
We have a criminal living in the White House. Ambassador Sondland, by his own words, told us that everyone was in the loop. That means it is a criminal enterprise engaged in by the president, from what we heard today, the vice president, the secretary of state, and the chief of staff.
I learned something about these impeachment trials. I learned, number one, that Donald Trump doesn't want me to be the nominee. Secondly, I found out that Vladimir Putin doesn't want me to be president.
Sadly, we have a president who is not only a pathological liar, he is likely the most corrupt president in the modern history of America.
Read the Mueller report, all 442 pages of it that showed how the president tried to obstruct justice, and when Congress failed to act at that moment, and that the president felt free to break the law again and again and again, and that's what's happened with Ukraine.
I have made it very clear that this is impeachable conduct, and I called for an impeachment proceeding. I just believe our job as jurors is to look at each count and make a decision.
The constitutional process of impeachment should be beyond politics, and it is not a part of the campaign, but the president's conduct is.
We also heard from Joe Biden about how he might deal with a possible criminal investigation into President Trump.
Would you support a potential criminal investigation into President Trump after he leaves office, even if you thought it might further inflame the country's divisions?
Look, I would not direct my Justice Department like this president does. I'd let them make their independent judgment. I would not dictate who should be prosecuted or who should be exonerated. That's not the role of the President of the United States. It's the Attorney General of the United States, not the President's attorney, private attorney. Let them make an independent judgment. If that was the judgment that he violated the law and he should be, in fact, criminally prosecuted, then so be it. But I would not direct it.
We have a full complement of our extended family and friends here with us to cover what was, again, a monumental news day in America. In the spin room in Atlanta tonight, grabbing the candidates as they come by, Chris Matthews, host of Hardball on this network, and here with us in New York, Claire McCaskill, former Democratic U.S. Senator from the great state of Missouri, Eugene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Washington Post, Steve Schmidt, former Republican strategist, most recently a former advisor to Howard Schultz, also notably a veteran of John McCain's campaign, and Lawrence O'Donnell, host of The Last Word, at the big board all night long tonight, our national correspondent, Steve Kornacki. Claire, I'd like to begin with you. I think as a point of information, everyone agreed was a superbly well-moderated debate tonight. Total control over candidates, material, and audience in the room, as far as I could tell. I'd be fine if they were named permanent debate moderators. There was a moment that caused cringes late in the evening. I want to say in the last 30 minutes, it involved Booker, Biden, and Harris. We'll air it and then we'll talk about it.
I have a lot of respect for the vice president. He has sworn me into my office as a hero. This week, I hear him literally say that I don't think we should legalize marijuana. I thought you might have been high when you said it.
I'm part of that Obama coalition. I come out of the Black community in terms of my support. If you notice, I have more people supporting me in the Black community that have announced for me because they know me. They know who I am. 3 former chairs of the Black Caucus. The only African-American woman that ever been elected to the United States Senate. A whole range of people.
No,
my point is,
not true. The other one is here.
I said that first. I said the first
Claire McCaskill, his correction there at the end was he meant the first.
He meant the first, but it was slightly awkward. Joe Biden is enjoying strong support in the Black community right now, far eclipsing the support of Kamala Harris and Cory Booker. That has to be frustrating. And I understand the points they're trying to make. I'm not sure that it worked, although I have so much respect for both Kamala and Cory. They're both dear friends of mine. But I think that's what you're seeing is that Joe Biden is so invincible in South Carolina because his numbers are so much higher than, in fact, so are Elizabeth Warren's and Bernie Sanders, I believe, in terms of support in the Black community. So part of this is these candidates are trying to get more familiar to Black voters, and I think that was one of the efforts that was being made tonight by both Cory Booker and Kamala Harris.
Eugene?
Yeah, I think several candidates were making that effort tonight. I'll get to Buttigieg in a minute, but that moment. Look, that was one of the Bidenisms. There were a couple of others in this debate. He's been spouting Bidenisms for his entire career. I mean, he misspeaks all the time, and he has done so for a long time. But I actually think that he had some really good moments in this debate. I mean, when he was talking, and when the debate turned to foreign affairs, and he talked about the Khashoggi murder in Saudi Arabia. He talked about how he would deal with China, how he saw that relationship. I thought he sounded authoritative in a way that showed his experience and his stature as vice president. And overall, it was kind of a Biden day, right? Because we watched an impeachment hearing for hours and hours, all talking about Biden
dozens of times.
And then I thought he did pretty well.
Let me interrupt you there because Rachel's with us. And first of all, you may kill me because I just said that it would be perfectly fine if you four were named permanent standing debate moderators. And I'm sorry about that.
I thought you were my friend.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But that is also another way of saying, again, job well done. And I would never ask you for a judgment, but I will ask you, because there is always news value in the hall, especially even during breaks, during the run-up that we in the television audience aren't able to see or feel or hear. What was your news judgment in the hall about things we weren't privy to?
You know, I was thinking about what I could tell you that you can get from here that you couldn't necessarily get through the screen. And I think one of the interesting dynamics, and I don't know where it comes from, but I think the crowd, I think the audience here was like in class at the start. Like it was, they were absorbing everything. You could have heard a pin drop for a very long time for the whole initial part of the debate. Now, certainly you heard people react. You'd hear small gasps or you'd hear murmurs or you'd hear people reaction. But I think as the crowd sort of warmed up as the candidates started to go at each other more. And there ended up being almost a little bit of a call and response with some of the candidates by the end. I thought Senator Harris actually evoked quite a bit of that, and a little bit from Senator Booker as well, even as you guys were describing what you could see through the screen in terms of the nature of those little kinetic moments. So again, I'm probably too close to it to know how it went overall, but I felt sitting here like, you know, these 10 candidates are getting a chance to put their best foot forward and make their best case. And even when they're fighting, it's mutually respectful and they're still sort of lifting each other up. I'll feel differently about it, I think, once I get out of here and have some time to think about it. But right now, I'm just glad we survived.
Finally, before we do let you go, the control over audience response, outburst, reaction was remarkable. And when I've done these things in the past, we try to ask them to keep it to a minimum because it takes away from debate time. How did you do that tonight, you four?
You know, part of it, I think, is the professionalism of the women who I was moderating with. Each of them is just nails. Like, these are, like, it's great to have 4 women moderators, and that's this sort of almost like a novelty thing of people who have been talking about it. I think people who have been talking less than we ought to have talked about how Ashley Parker, Kristen Walker, and Andrea Mitchell are people you would not want to meet in a dark alley if they were at you. Like, I'm a little bit of a wuss, but the 3 of them, like, you just don't push them around, and that's palpable, like force fields around them. I think that really helped. I will also say, Brian, and I know you appreciate these kind of things, that the technical staffing of this debate and the technical production of this debate was flawless. And sometimes at big events like this, big boisterous events like this with lots of cross currents, lots of different voices, some of the things that sometimes what goes wrong is that people can't necessarily hear what's happening, and the moderators aren't confident that you can hear us over the applause, and the candidates aren't confident that you can hear them over the crowd or each other. Here, technically, it was a flawless setup, both in terms of the Tyler Perry Studios and what they did for us, and in terms of our own production team. And you could hear everything and know where every sound was coming from. And I think that actually just made it easier for all of us to try to keep order.
The technical stuff is one of the things our team is really good at. The moderating stuff is, sadly for you, one of the things you're really good at. Rachel Maddow, enjoy the rest of your evening unless you have other plans. Thank you very much for joining us live from the venue tonight. Into the spin room we go. Chris Matthews with Senator Klobuchar. Chris.
I'm going to take off and go to sleep because I have to work really early. But thank you so much for the people who are still here. This is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And I know it's really easy to just lose hope, but don't lose hope, guys. We gotta do this thing. We gotta get that guy out and all of his little clanmates with him and take back our nation for everybody, not just the white people, not just the rich people. Good night, everybody. Thanks for your wonderful support. All right. Hopefully I'll see you next Wednesday for our Real Talk with Angry Soccer Mom. We have a lot to talk about. Please check out some of my newest videos. I have been putting videos out, and I would really appreciate everybody spreading the word to come onto my site. If you know any white folks who just are willing to learn, it'd be great to bring them on. I'm really trying to build that YouTube channel. Good night, Gary. Good night, Justin. I want to say good night to everybody. I'm not sure who's here still, but Nails and Glitter. Wow, you stayed up late. Thanks so much to everybody. And I'm going to stop talking in case people are trying to actually hear the show. But cannot thank everybody enough for coming out tonight. And we got to do this thing. Got to encourage everybody to get out and vote Democratic. I don't care who wins the nomination. They will get my vote. Good night.